Hi, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Real Paranormal Show with myself, Ralph, Holly, and Steve will be joining us shortly. Tonight's guest is Russell Edwards. He's discovered the Ripper case from 88, Holly? Yeah. So we'll welcome Russell in a moment. We've got Steve just joining us now. There we go.
Hi,
Welcome, Russell. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
Good evening.
Pleasure. Bye.
Right, Holly, I'll let you begin. This is your area.
Okay. How did you get started? How did you get started? What spurred you to look into this?
Well, to be honest, my introduction to London was through the Polytechnic in North London back in 1989. And I become close friends with a guy that lived in Bethnal Green.
Mm-hmm.
So as we were studying, we always used to go to the bagel shop, which is at the top end of Brick Lane. And that was my introduction to the East End, or that part of the East End. And as we go down Brick Lane, it's changed over the years, but it definitely has some atmosphere. And of course, cheap curry houses. And as a Scouser, well, I say Scouser, someone from Merseyside, it's quite a popular haunt. And it was cheap, back in those days. And I just fell in. There was, there's something there. That's all I can describe it. There's just something there, and you can't put your finger on it. And for over a decade, that's where I'm taking when I had a software company, that's where I'm taking all my clients. You get a good feel of London there. And so it wasn't until I watched that film with Johnny Depp and many other great actors, the Jack the Ripper film From Hell.
From Hell.
Great film. Factually, there's a few. Obviously, it's not who they say it is. And I thought, Jack the Ripper. I'm in the East End. I've been here for 11 years. So I went on a Ripper tour the next day. So it's Friday watching the film, and then on Saturday we went on a Ripper tour. And I dragged my wife at the time. It was 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. She wasn't best pleased. She definitely did not want to be there. And then I realised that all these places that I'd been for all these years, I've literally walked past murder scenes, and not known it, and that sort of, oh my God, was that the draw for me? And again, I'm quite direct with what I do. So rather than just going to pick up a book or look, not so much Googling then, I called Scotland Yard on the Monday and I said, where's all the facts to this case and is it real? And they said, you know what, if you want all the information, it's down at the archives at Kew. And that's where I went, and I discovered there's a lot of stuff that I've got, but really it made it real for me. And again, looking at the photographs of the victims, which you've got to do in like a dust-free room with the white gloves, and you've got to organise all of this. It was all brand new to me. And that's what made it real. But very, very quickly, what I realised is you could go around in circles for years with not. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Russell.
Not knowing. You could really. I came to the conclusion very quickly. Anybody could name anybody and fit a story around it and say he was Jack the Ripper, which is what's happened over the centuries, as you know. So I left it alone. But that's where the story started.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. What made you keep going with it all? What made you?
Well, that was I think it was 2001 or end of 2000 to 2001. And then it wasn't until 2007, I got a call from my mum and she said, are you aware? Because she obviously knew about my interest in the story and my link to the East End, that there was a shawl for sale. And it was in a place called Lacey Scott and Knight, which is like a very reputable auctioneers in Bury St Edmunds. And I lived in Newmarket. And for those that don't know, it's like a 20-minute drive. So I thought, for 20 minutes, let's just get in the car and go and have a look. So I called the auctioneers, went to see the shawl, and they have like a preview day. And number one, it's very big. Number two, it's very old. You can see it's old. But the thing is, it did have a lot of blood on there. And that, that sort of, oh, wow, that type of goriness. And I thought, you know what, I wonder if that's got any link to the story. My then wife, I'm always good for challenges. She turned around to me and says, you're not having that. And that was the challenge that really led me to a bull. So I did go to the auction. I'm turning up in those days. I'm turning up in a very posh car, and I try to dress down a bit, not to look really, sort of like up my own backside type of thing. So just try to blend in. And I stood with one of the prominent names that did a lot of key research before this was all as big as it is. And I waited for him because I thought he was going to go and buy it. And when the auction, when it actually started, the actual to buy the shawl, I had that key piece of evidence that I'd done, that only I knew, that linked the shawl to the dates of 3 of the murdered, the 3 of them, the dates. And he didn't bid, so I didn't bid. So nobody bought the shawl on that actual day, but I went back on the Monday and bought it. But the significant thing was how to justify that shawl could have gone, hundreds of thousands of pounds. How could I part with that amount of money on just a whim?
Yeah.
So the pattern on the shawl is why I'm here today and why I've done what I've done. I wouldn't have done what I've done without the science or the shawl. It would just be another curious speculation of who he is. So Dr. Jori Lokalainen did all the exceptional DNA work. He's very much in my work. We're both in each other's worlds. But it was the science that he did and some pioneering work that he did that's got us to where we are. But for me, the link was the pattern on the shawl, which Michaelmas daisies. Now, Michaelmas daisies are little flowers, but Michaelmas is an Eastern Orthodox and Western Orthodox Christian celebration. And that's celebrated on 2 night days of the year, 29th of September and the 8th of November. And they're the 2 nights he went out. He murdered 2 on the night of the 29th, and he murdered his final one on the night of the 8th of November. So that's what really got me hooked.
Right.
Wow.
Well, how have you obviously given that the shawl was on an auction site and things, have you actually tied it back to her? I know you said the DNA, but
yeah. Well, this is the thing. So when it was for sale or when it was up for auction, when it was a case of, it was called the Edo shawl. So I naturally assumed it was Catherine Edo's shawl, Yeah. And what happened was, I didn't do anything for several years with it because I was raising a boy. I had businesses at the time. That when we found the blood spatter to match a direct female descendant from Catherine Edo's, which the shawl was found at her murder scene, there was semen on the shawl. And we just ignored that at the time because we thought, well, it could. She obviously sold her body because she had no money on that day or the day before. So it's just a punter, if you like. So it was, that's how we did it. So it was a case of identifying the dating the shawl, so it's not a modern day forgery. Finding the blood, could we find a direct female descendant, which we did. And she very, great lady, good friend of mine, and always will be. She gave me a sample of the DNA, and we matched the DNA to the blood on the shawl. Now, lots of critics to the story have said, well, the contamination on the surface, which is, how did you do this? Well, Dr. Jori Lokalainen managed to pioneer a vacuuming technique that actually got uncontaminated samples embedded in between the weave of the shawl, which is about 2-3 millimeters thick. So that's how we got uncontaminated samples. And we've had lots of prominent scientists criticize, well, actually, we didn't get it from the surface. We got it that was embedded in the shawl, so it was uncontaminated. And then when I linked the shawl to the murder scene through the blood of the victim, we had my agent said, you know what, you're going to have to get more work than this because everybody will try and criticize this. I didn't know how much criticism I was up to until we released the book. And to at least date it or find the origin of the shawl. And we used what was called mass spectrometry. Again, thanks to Jori's great connections with really good scientists. And we found out that this was silk. So this wasn't cheap. This definitely would have been owned by a prostitute. You know, when you're living hand to mouth, you're not going to own something that could buy you a house.
You
or
got
get you
sold straight away, wouldn't it?
Exactly. And how would she got it in the first place when she stole it?
Yeah.
So then we realised, well, actually, we know that Kosminski's family, especially through his brother Isaac, was a prominent tailor, literally around the corner from the murders. And we realised that they had money, so that's how we linked it. Then all of a sudden, in fact, it's about now in 2012 this revelation happened, that we realised that the shawl at the murder scene wasn't Catherine Eddowes; it was actually taken there by the murderer.
Right.
So the semen on there. So that's how we did a lot of work to get to that conclusion. What happened was we then realised that the semen on the shawl, if it was in the ownership of the murderer, then the semen on it could only come from him.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Do you think that that Jack the Ripper, the guy, do you think he was wearing the shawl as maybe as a disguise?
Not so much. It's very big. Do you know the one thing that number one is, obviously I own the shawl now. You can fold it and you can fit it into a side pocket. It's that you can literally this piece of material. You can fold it right down to. But really, you know, on the murders there wasn't that much blood on any of the murders. I don't know if you know that. There wasn't that much blood. So I don't know if he took, because obviously there's we've only done the analysis for one victim because it was significant to that murder scene. But whether he used different whatever material to soak up the blood, you know, and again, remembering he's got to leave a murder scene, and if he's going to be covered in blood, he's going to attract attention. So whether he used it like a mask or to, you know, I don't know, you know. But I think it was something along the lines of to stop the blood going on him, because it is significant. There wasn't that much blood at any of the murder scenes except for the final one.
Or maybe used it maybe like a bib, just tucked in, you know, and let it cover the front of his. Because I mean, classic image of Jack the Ripper is kind of in evening wear with his top hat and everything. So he'd have a, you know, you'd think white shirt or whatever, wouldn't you, and all that. So you can see that being used to cover, you know. Yeah,
that's what, you know. Again, what I've done is all scientific fact, and this is, you know, like I say, this is a speculation, but most possibly, but it would have been used for that. Just so you know, on all the research I've done, there is no witness saying there was a guy wearing a top hat and.
No. It's just that classic image, isn't it? I mean,
from the media getting involved in it.
Movie world, isn't it?
Yeah, they want to make it Elliot. It's like I know it's a slightly different subject, but it's like your highwaymen. Everybody thinks they're all like toffs and everything. So I can see, so I can see that the Ripper has got its own. I suppose it's got its own myths and things that go around it. So it's quite fascinating that Russell's coming forward with scientific facts. There's things that you can tie to it, you know. So your journey with this then, Russell, must have been quite fantastic. I mean, it's not like you're turning up new things all the time with it.
Yeah, I must admit there was only a few of us in this journey at the time. My agent, who's been with me, just wait to him today. I just had an idea, you know, let's put this together in a story, and I got recommended this agent, and he and I have been on this journey for 10 years now. Now, when we were in the thick of it to try and prove who it was, you know, you sometimes sit back and think, Christ, I'm doing something so historic that if it comes off, this is it forever, you know. And it does feel like that. But there was only my agent, Yari, obviously. There was the guy that did the mass spectrometry, the sperm head analyst, who did the sperm head work to identify, you know, to get the DNA from that. All of this is all significant. It's our own little clique. So Yari and I, who are very, very close together now, Yari and I had special codes. We knew there was this guy reporter trying to, a bit like that reporter in the Hulk, you know, from the 70s. We had one of those. So we had to make sure emails were checked. There was all sorts of, you know, very clandestine it was. And we even used to speak in code. We both had £10 throwaway phones that we had in code because we didn't want anybody to know. And I think one of the great things is that there must have been not more than 6 people involved in this whole story. So you know. But again, the descendants of Kosminski, who we got the DNA from to match the semen on the shawl, you know, she was in with us as well. The family of Kosminski, they definitely don't want any publicity, and I gave my word, and I've honoured that all these years, and I will do to the day I die, that we'd never disclose that, because simply because, well, again, I'm not saying the job
they'd never get left alone.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's very fair.
Yeah.
But it was an exciting journey, and it still is, for different reasons now. Because obviously, we brought the book out in September 2014. This story hasn't ended there; it's still on. Well, we've got exactly what we need now, which I can't disclose for the second. I'm under, you know, for that, I'm under confidentiality. But where we were just naming him to where we are now, there's a significant bit to tell, you know.
Yeah, fantastic.
So just, I'm probably going over something you've already might have mentioned, but how did you tag it to him? So you've got the shawl, you've got the blood. So how do we get to him?
Yeah, good question. Again, I always had Demon as a guy that would be a likely suspect. But when I discovered the Michaelmas connection between the pattern of the shawl and the murder dates,
right?
I knew, because in the auctioneer's catalogue it said it was kept in Scotland Yard's Black Museum through the 90s.
Yeah.
So a guy called Alan McCormack has been very helpful for me. I called Alan and said, "Do you know that how I have actually linked the shawl to the dates of the murders? Because no one really knows or knew at that point why you went out and murdered on those dates." And here, little old me, armchair detective, this is why you went out and murdered on these days. And Alan was blown away. And what Alan said to me, so this is the curator of the Black Museum, he said, he said, "You know what, Russ, that's the first bit of genuinely new information that's not been regurgitated for decades." And he said to me, "I don't even know why they do these tours, write these books, do these documentaries, make these films. We've always known who Jack the Ripper was." And he said, "It was Aaron Kosminski." And he just told me like that. So you can imagine, that floored me. And I'm like, "Wow, Aaron Kosminski, yeah." And I said, "Please tell me how and why." And he said, "No." He said, I tell you what," he said, I won't tell you the story. You go and find what you need to find, come back to me, and I'll confirm or deny." And that's how, and he was like, that's how it was with me and Alan.
Game of chess.
But to be honest, I didn't waste his time until I knew, you know, I'm going to call Alan now. I didn't call him out, "Hey mate, what about this?" It was very.
You had a list ready.
Yeah.
I know the detective. Is it Alba? Is that the detective's name? Albaline? Was a detective back then? Yeah, that's it. He thought it was it George Chapman?
George Chapman.
He thought it was him, didn't he? Because the medical background. But everyone thinks of the medical side, don't they? They always think. But then I think because of From Hell and that, everyone thinks of a surgeon or something, don't they? And also I know, was there a Dr. Philip that did a post-mortem, and it was him that recommended it was to be someone with a medical background?
Yeah. There was a couple of coroners, and they both conflicted. One said they had anatomical knowledge, the other one said they didn't. You know, I think that was to save, to be honest, again, speculation, but I think that was to save the medical community, considering the hospital, the Royal London Hospital, is literally up the road from the murders.
Right,
in fact, the third and the first murder, the hospital's in between. So you can imagine the furor against the medical community. But in fact, I was just watching something today. You know, I have had coroners on the tour. I have had on my tours. I have had the Ministry of Justice with me. And again, for example, go back to Catherine Eddowes, has more meaning to me. How would you know where the kidney, which he took from a body, and the uterus are, and be able to take those away in a way where you're not cutting up anything else? How would you know how to do this without any surgical knowledge? And again, we found out Kosminski's asylum record said hairdresser, but really barber surgeon. So they had a rudimentary anatomical knowledge. I'm going to give you a little gift, which I gave the lady last week, that I've discovered that Kosminski, down as his occupation, was a butcher. Which is I'll give you that. That's a new thing that you know, you know, skinned like a pig was something that was mentioned at the time. but they must have had some sort of anatomical knowledge. And again, as I'm saying this, you know, whereas we're sitting here like this, you know, I've lived that story, and to think of a human being to be torn up in that way, you know, they like the word ripped up, but you know, just butchered really. You know, these were human beings, 5 women who were very much down on their luck, and what he did to them was horrendous. You know.
He acted pretty quickly, didn't he? Because I know in Mitre Square, wasn't there a police officer did every 15 minutes patrol? Was it Watkins? He did he did a patrol every 15 minutes, didn't he? And obviously, but it wasn't very well lit where she was murdered, was it?
That's right.
And that's why,
Yeah. So just with that, P.T. Watkins, that night he did his patrol left-handed, which means he did it the opposite way round, because local vagabonds and thieves, if you like, would time the police officers. So if the police officer goes round, so say P.T. Watkins, and you're standing, you've got 15 minutes to do what you want to any of those houses. So he did it the opposite way that night for some really weird reason. The other thing is, which is again coming out, I've placed this acting sergeant who was there, who got the shawl originally, and I bought that from his descendants. I've placed him and 3 of his other colleagues, the acting sergeants, in just literally around the street in Mitre Street, so they were there as well. So remembering just all of these very weird, that you know, was it Keely and Tong's warehouse opposite? The night watchman, who's a retired police officer, he had his door open. He didn't hear a thing. And only 8 minutes before Catherine Eddowes was found, 3 Jewish men were walking past Catherine Eddowes and him. But many people have asked, so how long would you take? How long? I've asked that question, obviously. How long would it take to inflict these atrocities? You know, Catherine Eddowes, between 2 to 3 minutes. But if you see what he did to her, you're like, come on now.
Yeah.
No.
But then if you look at the butcher, when the butcher starts with a large piece of meat and it's like you say, it's only a few moments in it and it's done. You know,
and it's like you said, virtually in darkness, really.
Yeah. And what he did, it was pretty horrific, wasn't it? I mean, he got.
And he had to kill her as well, didn't he? He had to kill him as well. You know.
Yeah. So I always so did he do it from the front? Did he do it from the back? Did he do it from the side? How? You know. But again, I always use the word or related to the word throttle. So not like the strength. You know, he really took the lives as quick as he could.
Yeah.
You know, and in Catherine Eddowes' case, I don't even think he wasted. I think he really went for it. You know.
Yeah. What do you think of Israel Schwartz and his because he's the main one, wasn't he? That saw man grab. Yeah.
You know what? Actually, there's one I preferred earlier. So Donald Swanson, nearly every paper on every single report went through this guy's hand, and he had a lot to do with the story. So this is Donald Swanson, and this is his report from the interview he took from Israel Schwartz. So just read this little bit here, if I can read it. So again, go back to Top Hat and Tails, go back to Gladstone Bag and the mystery of London. And actually, it just wasn't like that. So this is with Israel Schwartz, who was the guy who identified Kosminski further down the line once Kosminski was arrested.
Yeah.
And Israel Schwartz saw a man, it says, stop and speak to a woman who was standing in the gateway. This is Elizabeth Stride, and she was murdered in Duckfield's Yard in Berners Street. And their body was found at 1 a.m. in the morning by a guy called Louis Deemschutz. 15 minutes before, there's a guy called Israel Schwartz walking past the entrance to Duckfield's Yard, and he sees what happens before he was found murdered. So standing in the gateway, the man has tried to pull the woman into the street, but then he turned and pulled it down. He threw it down on the footway, and the woman screamed 3 times, but not very loudly. on crossing to the opposite side of the street. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever been there, but it's very narrow. If you were standing opposite me there, you can see the whites of your eyes. It's just maybe one parked car and one car. That's the width of the street. She screamed 3 times, but not very loudly. On crossing to the opposite side of the street, he saw a second man. So you've got Duffield's Yard, and then just literally two doors down, you've got a corner pub. There's a guy standing there watching what's going on as well, smoking a pipe. On crossing the opposite side of the street, he saw a second man standing there lighting the pipe. The man that they're going back to Kosminski. The man who threw the woman down called out apparently to the other man on the opposite side of the road, and he said the word Lipsky. Now, Lipsky refers to a guy called Israel Lipsky, who was hanged for poisoning his wife the year before. So if you say a Jewish guy, you'd say Lipsky. And then Schwartz walked away. But finding that he was followed by the second man, he ran as far as the railway arch, but the man did not follow so far. Now, the railway arch is quite significant because that's where a year after, oddly enough, on Kosminski's birthday, a woman was, that's where the Pigeon Street torso was found, where those railway arches are. And that's 5 minutes, not even 5 minutes away. But he would have run quite a long way. Obviously, I know the geography very well. But that's the testimony of Israel Schwartz. He's the only guy, and that's what Scotland Yard, that's what Alan told me. He was the only eyewitness to see one of the victims being attacked before she was murdered. There were lots of other witnesses. George Hutchinson from Mary Jane Kelly. There was a guy called Elizabeth Long who saw Mary Jane Kelly was the 5th victim. Annie Chapman, the 2nd victim. She saw a man said, "Will you?" Or you're. He said she thought she heard some words. But again, you've seen with somebody with a woman doesn't mean that's the murderer. No. They could have walked up to be somebody else. So the only, when you're attacking a woman and she's found within 15 minutes, good chance that was the guy. Lots of debate over, well, so think about this just logically. You're going to attack a woman and then you're going to walk away, and then the other murderer is going to come along while the woman's on the floor and kill her. I don't see how that follows, but that's been conjectured for donkey's years with ripperologists.
I think the woman getting attacked by the man back then, a woman's value were non-existent, basically, weren't it? Especially like street workers and things like that. Nobody would have turned an eye at somebody getting a good hiding, would they?
No.
Just kind
of thing.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, the geography of where Berners Street is to where Whitechapel is, where the 10 Bells is, the famous book that's still there. It's quite quieter there, Berners Street. And lo and behold, as I say, I know where Kosminski lived at the time. If you walk to where Berners Street is, so you've got Berners Street, you walk to Commercial Road, the big main road into the city. The road opposite, that's where Kosminski lived. And it's out the main drive.
Right.
Okay. Do you know in the case of Emma Smith, the 3rd of April, 1988,
3rd of April.
Do you think she was a victim of the Ripper?
That's a good question. I do think Martha Tabram was. Yeah. But Emma Smith, that's 3 teenagers, 3 youths attacked her. Yeah. On the corner basically it was the corner of Wentworth Street and Osborne Street. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning in front of anybody walking past. And what they did to her, they didn't slash her throat. They basically stabbed a sharpened stick between her legs enough to rupture her pounding. When you're looking at the MO of a murderer, it doesn't fit. It feels with Emma Smith that was more to do with she wouldn't pay any protection money from what's called the high rip gangs. Right. And they just took a livelihood away from us. So if you're not paying us, you're not going to earn money as well.
Yeah.
It's just interesting. She was, because remember, there's 11 Whitechapel murders, 5 of which are attributed to Jack the Ripper, and she's the first of those 11. So not Emma Smith so much, but definitely Martha Tabram, who was the next on the list.
Yeah. As you say about like slashing the throats and things, that's one thing that got me with the whole theory of George Chapman, because his was poisoning, wasn't it? He poisoned his wives. And I was like, well, why would you go from doing one thing to then change a method to another? Because that's not normally what a serial killer would do. Especially they've got their own kind of motive, and as they go on, they get more violent. And that's what he did. He got more violent with it, and his thing was to silence them. It was to slit the. It was his kind of mark, wasn't it?
Yeah, George Chapman was a wife poisoner. He clearly wasn't the Ripper, but it's interesting. I'd like to see where the document is, one of these, where Frederick Aberline said to Sergeant Godley, "You've caught Jack the Ripper." I'd like to see where that's written down.
Yeah.
Because that's what they were saying.
Yeah.
Judge Chapman was a wife poisoner, obviously hanged for it, but not the Ripper. But you're right, the MO is completely different.
Yeah, that's what I thought as well. Yeah.
So, how much of a background have you got into Klinsky? Have you looked right into who he was, what he's done?
Kuzminski, yeah. And we discussed that I'm a psychotherapist. I've actually studied the psyche of the psyche. What was his mindset? Where did he come from? What made him a murderer? And again, that's for the second book. And it goes back to when he was about 8. I took a team a couple of years ago. Great, Elaine Sugden Kelly was asked me, could I take a team of paranormal investigators around the murder scenes just to see if they got out anything, you know. And again, it was fascinating what we got from that, you know. So when we looked again. The most significant thing for me was Elizabeth Stride's murder scene. But it's interesting when you look at these things and how the story fits, you know.
Yeah.
But he remember his father died at 8. A significant loss. That it's all to do with the mother. It's a lot to do with that. Schizophrenia. You know, the evidence I've got. You know, something else here to show you that with schizophrenia, you know, or you say psychopaths nowadays, it's called schizoaffective now. What was his mindset?
Yeah.
What made him the murderer he is, or was? Sorry.
It's that trigger point, isn't it? Looking at that particular point in his history where that trigger is pulled for him to step over that mark of normality, you know, and going into what he were doing.
So it's interesting you say that because, you know, going back to Emma Smith, that was 3 teenagers or 3 youths, you know. Now, Kuzminski was 23 at the time of the murders. Was he one of those 3? Did he get that thrill of attacking a woman so violently? We'll never know. He could well have been one of those 3. You know, but again, you know.
Do you think he could have been involved in the occult or anything like that, even in that age?
Do you know? You tell me, because you know what's the interesting thing is the way he laid his victims out so methodically. You know, to let the world know it was him. You know, with the arm stretched out, the head in a certain position. You know, you've got to remember, for any of your listeners that don't know, he slashed the throats, he disemboweled them, he put their entrails over the shoulder, he took body parts with him, and he left them in a specific way. I don't know what that was about. You know, I don't know if that's got something to do with the occult.
It's possible with removal of body parts, isn't it? Part removal. I mean, the body itself could have been some phantom picture that he has in his mind, or he wants to lay everyone out of that same way. It could be an upset, could be any of them things, couldn't it? But to remove parts, they're for a specific reason. Are they just talking trophies, or are they going to be used in some kind of ceremony or ritual later on to feed his next attack? You know,
that's an interesting observation, because somebody suggested that he actually ate that, you know, the skin or the body part. We know something happened with the kidney from Catherine of those. But you know, a ritual, very ritualistic, definitely.
Even with it, I know you mentioned about the dates. You'd picked up on dates, specific dates. for killings to the guy himself. So maybe that clashes with some rituals as well. That you know, there's numerous dates through our calendar that certain specific things are performed with certain parts, depending on, you know, which kind of ritual you're approaching. So it's possible that maybe them parts could be matched to them dates as well that we're missing.
Yeah.
Well, what I've done for the next story is identified why he murdered Polly Nichols, his first victim, on the 31st of August, 1888, and why he murdered Annie Chapman on the 8th of September, 1888. Again, just remembering them the nights before, so they're a bit misleading. So even though they're documented the dates, it was, you know, in the middle of the night, if you like. Yeah. And I've pieced together the 2 dates before. Obviously, we've linked Michaelmas irrefutably, but possible connections to the other 2 murder dates. Yeah.
Wow.
Fantastic stuff. What were your first, before this came along, Russell, and were you interested in Jack the Ripper, or is it just it just come along and you were like, oh man, that rest of my life's going to be dedicated to Jack the Ripper now?
Just Excuse me. Originally, it was a passing interest. I grew up on horror films as a kid, you know, the classic Dracula and Frankenstein. And I don't like too much gore at all, but I do like the suspense, the thriller thing. But really, it was the connection. So I did put in the book. It's really weird. I mean, I'm sure you guys will get there once we're free to roam this world. But I had this one day, and it's the locations that are left are Princelet Street, Wilk Street, Hanbury Street, and Fournier Street. They're still like they used to be, or half of Hanbury Street. You walk down there, you feel, you just go, whoa, there's this like immense whoa about the place. And I had that before I had anything to do with Jack the Ripper. But really, once I watched the film, I just wanted to see if there was a chance someone could name Jack the Ripper. Before I got the shawl, I left it there, and I wasn't that much interested in that at all. No. But once I got the shawl, it was when I sold all the businesses that I thought, you know, I'm going to give some time for this. Yeah. And that's what I did. But I didn't come across Jack the Ripper that much at all until the film.
Change your life.
Complete, you know, I was a care home owner looking after over 100 elderly. I had 155 staff. Yeah. And I went from that to walking around Whitechapel every night wearing a bowler hat. So
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So has this led you on to obviously you've looked at one particular guy, but has it led you into looking at the other ones as well?
Well, yeah, just a simple process of elimination, really.
Right.
Obviously, everyone, you know, the millions of people have said, was it Prince? Well, no. George Chapman, another one. Demon, which is another one. And one which always gets brought up for me is Walter Sickert. Which is another.
I was going to say to you, Walter Sickert, with his paintings.
Yeah, that's right. That became an obsession for another person. And that person tried to place Walter Sickert at the murder scenes through a stamp. And I think, look what I've just got here.
I think, was it Patricia Cornwell that brought that out?
Yeah. The thing is, it's a stamp. So what she spent £3 million doing or more was proving that Walter Sickert wrote a Ripper letter, but it doesn't mean that he committed the murders.
Yeah.
No.
We came across the people that did the work on that stamp, and it turned out that DNA was female as well, so it wasn't even male DNA. So the ignorance, not the ignorance, that's the wrong word, to ignore very glaring facts when you're just obsessed, that's the Ripper. Mm-hmm. I find that with a lot of people that have approached me, you know, they've got completely convinced it's this person. And you're like, well, okay, how can you actually prove that in a court of law? And they can't. It's just so spurious. Mm-hmm. But the other thing which is completely ignored about Walter Sickert was he was in France at the time of the murders. That's completely bypassed, you know. So it's things like that. There was a fascinating documentary on BBC One. Bit of a letdown for the story, but it was fascinating that they did the geographical, you know, the spread of where the Ripper came from. And of course, it's exactly where Kosminski lived. And they did say it was Kosminski, even though not in a very convincing way. Yeah, but the suspects, you know, there were only 3 suspects. And that brings me quite neatly onto this little bit of information. This was written, this is called the Mcnorton Memorandum, where I've got my hand here. So in 1894, a guy called Melvin Mcnorton wrote there were only 3 suspects, and here they are. Number 1, Montague John Jewett. Guess what? Number 2, Kosminski, and number 3, Michael Cook.
Wow.
There were only 3 suspects. Now there's about 161 of them.
Yeah. Is it including a female now as well?
Do you know where that comes from? Either it was a midwife, so she's covered in blood, so she could walk away, or there was a Jill the Ripper, and that's a story based in Camden, where the woman was having an affair with this man, and she murdered his wife and daughter, and she walked, I think it was along the Regent's Canal or Regent's Park Road, with the dead baby at the time got caught, and then they named her Jill the Ripper, and then give 100 years after, and all of a sudden Jill the Ripper's got to be a woman.
Right.
Right. I'm sure you know about. I'm sure, Holly, that you'd know if it was a female murderer, if it was a female serial killer, what would she be murdering? She'd be murdering men, unless she was gay.
Yeah.
So there's no chance. Just to be honest, again, if I didn't have the shawl and we didn't do the great scientific work with Dr. Jori Lokalainen, I wouldn't be here, because I wouldn't want to hazard any guess on any spurious suspect. The only reason why I'm here today is because we scientifically, beyond all reasonable doubt, did the DNA work and matched the shawl, the blood to the victim, and the semen to him, and we placed the shawl with him. Otherwise, the rest of it's just, you know, speculation.
Is there any record of him doing anything else when he went back home, or is it just in London?
Oh yeah, no. He grew up in Kladower in Poland, and then came over to Whitechapel. Well, actually, very small little cliques of areas. It's Mile End Old Town, which is where his brother Isaac lived, in Greenfield Street, opposite Berners Street. But what it was there's something about a dog, walking an unmuzzled dog, years after. But what we've got here is this memorandum, which I just want to read to you. It says Kosminski, so the name, suspect, and the reason why. A Polish Jew resident in Whitechapel. This man became insane owing to many, I can't read that word, indulgence in solitary vices. And solitary vices, believe it or not, back then was more to do with masturbation, which is, you know, you put that down to schizophrenia, believe it or not. He had now this is the thing, so how did they know this? He had a great hatred of women, especially the prostitute class. He had strong homicidal tendencies, so he knew he was a misogynist. How? We haven't got that. We haven't got any more documents for that. But we've got this to say that they knew he was. Strong homicidal tendencies. He was moved to a lunatic asylum around March 1889, which is just about 5 months after Mary Kelly. There were many. I can't read that one. Connected with this man, and which made him a strong suspect. And again, that's the Mcnorton Memorandum. When we get to Kosminski was the suspect, again going back to the 2 guys in charge, Donald Swanson and Robert Anderson, it was named. They named, so the 2 men in charge of the whole case said Kosminski was the suspect, and so they actually named him. So again, in my little world of research, I found a newspaper report in 1910 saying this was the guy, this is how it was, this is how he was named, and yet everyone goes, oh, guess what? It was the prince, or guess what? It was Jill. It's just the fact that people will not accept the truth.
It's kind of sells more as a romanticized idea, doesn't it, than it does actually proving that it was this guy here. This is him with. I mean, when you're looking at that, what you've just read out is kind of beginnings of profiling. When profiling kind of just started to come in, you know, taking more information and things. It weren't kind of necessarily just relied on being one person, you know.
There's a guy called Dr. Thomas Bond, and I've got the one of the first ever criminal profiles ever made was on the Ripper. And I'll tell you how it reads. I won't waste your time now. It reads as if they caught Kosminski and then wrote the profile on him. Completely matched him.
Yeah.
You know, completely.
Yeah. It's just fascinating because when we think back in them times, we think kind of not so good investigating skills, not so good. It were kind of, right, I've caught you, clobber, in back at van, off to trial, and what severe punishment you got, you know. But there's a lot of intricacies, got my teeth in. They're starting to come together around this time, aren't they? You know, and this kind of investigating, and I find it fascinating change. You know how they changed.
They did their best.
Yeah,
with what they had.
Yeah.
Again, it was either confession or catching him at the crime scene. They're the only two ways back then.
Yeah.
And there seemed to be so many other clues as well that were off leading, or same with like when we, you know, when you have other, you get these people jump in, crazy, not crazy, I don't know what they are, but they're kind of throwing everything going off all over, you know. It's
I'm fascinated on a slightly different level. So you've got a female that's been murdered. How do you pick out a particular gentleman? How do you get to him?
For me,
yeah.
Well, I told you. Scotland Yard told me it was Kosminski.
So how did they know it was him? Can you?
Good question. Perfect. Okay, so just after Mary Kelly was discovered completely, there was not hardly anything left of her. If you've seen the picture there, Kosminski attacked his own sister with a knife, and his brothers Wolf and Isaac had enough, and they got him arrested. Then Kosminski was taken outside of London. Away. What I'm telling you now is what Scotland Yard told me, by the way. It's not me making it up. So Kosminski was taken out of London, away from the public gaze. Because can you imagine, back then, you know, you'd point to somebody, say Jack the Ripper, oof, the crowd would come along. So they took him very quietly down to a seaside town, and that's where they took Israel Schwartz. And it was that piece of information that Scotland Yard said to me, tell me who the eyewitness was, and we'll tell you the rest of the story. So that was one of those things that I did.
Yeah.
So I said it was Israel Schwartz. Said, yeah, it was Israel Schwartz. So then they took Israel Schwartz down to the seaside town, and they confronted him. Now, confronted doesn't mean the same as identified. Now, identified means you've got a line up 6 people. You go along and say, that was the man. But this is Jack the Ripper, remember? Yeah. So confronted means they had Kosminski in a room. They took Israel Schwartz into that room, and Israel Schwartz looked at Kosminski, and there was an unhesitating ID that was the man he saw attacking Elizabeth Stride on the night she was murdered. They took him out, they gave him 10 minutes, and went back in the room again, and it's still, that was the man. Unfortunately, Israel Schwartz wouldn't testify. A fellow Jewish man, if you like. And again, that, according to Jewish law back then, that if you saw a crime being committed by a Jewish man and you were Jewish and you didn't report it, you were as guilty as the perpetrator. That was one of them. There's loads of other things, but the thing is, Israel Schwartz wouldn't testify, full stop. So they couldn't, and they couldn't use that identification because a confrontation was considered a weak ID and wouldn't stand up in a court of law. So they got Kosminski. They knew it was him, but they couldn't arrest him for that. So they didn't know what to do with him. So they put him under charge. And again, thankfully, I found all this documentation. They put him under charge of his brother. Now, I've got all the stuff of what happened when Eric Kosminski was locked away and what happened to his body. And it's all done by his brother, Wolf. So I'm under the assumption it's Wolf that looked after him. And so he was under guard to CID guys, detectives, kept an eye on him. Then in March 1889, he put him away in a certain place, which I can't tell you because that's in the next book. And I found this information. And so I know exactly where he was, and I found where he was. They did release him again under charge of his brother, and that's actually in the documents that I've got. And then they locked him away formally for good in February. In fact, where are we? February the 7th or 9th, 1891.
11th.
When it's a 50-foot film.
Right.
So it's round about now.
So this week, round about this week.
Yeah. And that's where, you know, Hebrew, age 23, they put him down as mania, but it was schizophrenia, hairdresser or barber, you know, hairdresser surgeon, so anatomical knowledge. Again, solitary vices. Again, all of this stuff, you know, you can go and find it. Anybody can. It's not just that I did something special. You can find a lot of this stuff yourself by just actually getting off your backside and going to the archives and finding it yourself.
It's a similar process to we use to solving a case. If we have a case that's particularly nasty in this paranormal field, then we'll go through a process of eliminating. But we also go through a process of you look at land, you look at the family, you look into history, you look into if there's any bizarre events happened around all this stuff that takes weeks and weeks. You know, it's obviously not years and years, but some cases we have got that are years long. But like it is that, like you say, you've got to get up and go and do it, haven't you? You know, it's not going to come to you. It doesn't drop on your lap, does it? You know.
Yeah. I was very lucky to. I sold the care homes back in 2008, and I was very lucky to have the financial resource myself to afford to have that time to do all of this. You know. And as you say before, it was a fantastic journey at the time, the journey of discovery. So you know, people make a living out saying he was a sailor. Well, I know why he wasn't a sailor, but the person that makes money out of that won't tell the world this. You know. But you're right. I didn't know how to do any of this at the beginning. Trust me. Now you know, but now it's sort of second nature.
Wow. I wonder. Sorry, Steve. I was just going to say, I wonder if we've any questions from the people who are watching for Russell, please. Billy, have we got any? Carry on, Russell. We'll put them on when they come up.
I'm going to ask you a question, Russell. It's has it thrown up anything really unusual for you that you weren't expecting?
There was a moment. It was November the 9th, which is the anniversary of Mary Kelly a few years ago. It was teeming down with rain. We thought that we'd lost the samples of DNA from Kosminski. And Yari called me and said, I've actually got it. We found it. We've done it. And at that moment in time, I was walking through Greenfield Street where he lived, completely by pure fluke. I was actually going somewhere through Whitechapel from Shadwell through to Whitechapel. And you know what? I don't know if you've ever experienced this, guys, but time stood still. I completely froze, and everything. It's as if the raindrops just literally froze. With that thing in Big Fish where you could just. And I got him, and I don't know but my actual thoughts were, "I've got you, you bastard." That's what went through my mind. Those type of little special things that are personal in your own discoveries, those type of things, and they happen to me a lot, but that one was a significant one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Hiya. Right. So we have got questions in back. If you don't mind answering them, Russell. It might actually be where you're probably repeating yourself a little bit. So I'm sorry if that comes about. We've got one from Richard. What says, Russell, is it true that the identity of the Jack the Ripper were never proved?
Well, officially, they couldn't.
Proved it.
I have.
Next.
This is reason why, guys. Knowing who's actually watching this feed, why I haven't put the questions up, because a lot of them were actually answered when Russell were talking. But I'm actually going to place them up because there's a lot of unhappy people. Right. So, let's see. Was it true? Well, one of them, was it true that it was some kind of doctor or surgeon?
We've covered that.
Covered that, yeah. And were there any connections to Hull? any kind of suspect names to Hull?
I'm thinking of Frederick Deeming.
Oh, you're only Deeming, yeah.
Yeah, but it wasn't him, so.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I've got to go through this. Was there any thought there might be someone called Lizzie Williams?
Never heard of it.
No.
No. Right, so there were one here from Mandy Bell. Someone said there was a copycat of the Ripper who was arrested in 2007.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't a copycat. What it was a guy murdered 2 prostitutes, and they caught him because nowadays most people might not know if they've not been in the area. There's cameras everywhere. In every street corner in that area, there's cameras, and they actually caught him with walking to one of the prostitutes to where he killed her. It wasn't exactly a copycat.
Wow, that's graphic.
Yeah.
Well,
that's my question then. I know
that's it. I think that's it.
we're going back a bit and we're saying about the police force and back in them times and things. Is it true that when Catherine Eddowes was killed, obviously there was the writing, wasn't there? There was the what was it? The Jews are not the one. I can't remember what it was.
The Gilson Street graffito.
Yeah,
the Jews are the men who will not be blamed for nothing.
Yeah, that's it. Was it true that there was 2 police forces and one wanted to photograph it and another one decided to wipe it?
Absolutely. Well, because it was Catherine, the 4 of the murder victims were in the Metropolitan of London, which is number 1, 2, 3, and 5, and number 4, Catherine Eddowes. Mitre Square just went over the boundary into the City of London. So that murder was under his jurisdiction. He was based in, the street will come to me. But that's where the police station still is.
Right.
And Charles Warren, who was the police commissioner, he was asked to come and to view the scene. It's about 5:30 in the morning. So it's like a few hours after Catherine Eddowes was found. You can imagine, right? So there's 2 murders inside an hour in 2 different parts of London. You can imagine that in itself.
Yeah.
And then when they found the Gilson Street graffito, which is a police officer from A Division, not even H Division, which was that area, if you like. So everybody was brought in to find this lunatic. And when they saw the chalk handwriting, there was a piece of Catherine Eddowes' apron on the floor, and it has been suggested, which I can't say it's a fair assumption, that he took that to wipe the knife and just throw it on the ground. I can't. If you think about this, you're going out to murder these women in whatever way that he did, and you're taking your Ripper kit with you, and you think, you know what, tonight I'm going to take a piece of chalk and leave a piece of very cryptic message on the wall, which he did.
Yeah.
And Charles Warren actually was what I understand is he was instructed to wash the chalk handwriting off because Gilson Street was a heavy Jewish area. In fact, that's where the Jewish tailors would meet. And as you know, Kosminski's brother Isaac was a tailor. And there would have been a huge, which there was anyway, anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
So he said, just wipe that off the wall, not thinking that could have been the biggest clue to the handwriting ever.
Yeah.
And Charles Warren resigned. I think it was like 5 weeks after. In fact, he resigned on the day of the 5th murder victim.
Wow.
Right. Okay.
Wow. Do you think he had an accomplice? Do you think he had?
Good question.
Do you think he had? We always see the guy in the coach and horses, don't we? You know.
Yeah, John Netley. You know, all these years of doing this story, so I've been in this story now for over 2 decades, and I can tell you, if such a madman how could you do such a murder, then go back home, such a high, a bit like Peter Sutcliffe, you just go home and go to bed,
Yeah.
Like
a bit of a clue, because Israel Schwartz thought that he could not say whether the man with the pipe watching Kosminski attacking Elizabeth Stride were connected, but whether he was a lookout, you just don't know,
Yeah.
But I've always thought if basically he was locked up, if you think of a monster being locked up in a kennel, a bit like how the Baskervilles, and you're let out to do what you do and then locked back away. If you think of it, that type of thing, it could have been something like that. But you know what? It's again, I only did it because I've got scientific evidence on my side. Otherwise, it just is all speculation.
It's very difficult, I suppose, to stop. I mean, we find it as well with cases. It's very difficult to not go down that path, isn't it? You know, you get so many crossroads, and it's really easy to just go straight down one, and you get to end of it after hours and hours.
They issued a pardon to a potential accomplice that they would have given them amnesty if they gave up the name of they gave up the murder at the time. So there was a pardon for if there was an accomplice.
Yeah.
Right, we've got a question, Ross. At what point do you think that, given all the extensive evidence you have provided, it will be accepted that Aaron Kosminski was Jack the Ripper? This is from Katie Marie Edwards.
That's our Katie. That's my cousin. So she's got a good point, because you know what? We named this 6-7 years ago, and yet it's always been said to me, in the world of ripperology, in the tour companies that make a lot of money out of this, they've got a vested interest in trying to rubbish this story. They will always be there. But I've always been told, if Jack the Ripper handed the bloody knife to somebody and said, "Here, hide this, I'm Jack the Ripper," even the people will still say, "You're not Jack the Ripper," and you've just got to live with them. People have. I don't own this story, by the way. It's, you know, I just did something through very excellent scientific research and my own work. I don't own this story, and nobody else does. There's a lot of people who think they own this story. What I'd like to say is, you know, finally someone just, you know, a grown-up in that world will say, you know what, actually we give in. It was him. You've got it nailed to rights. Not because of circumstantial evidence, but through scientific evidence. What I can say, I've got a document, which again I can't show you at this point in this journey, and we're still in this journey, that if I read it out to you from a very prestigious individual, who I can't mention because it'll give the game away, if I read the 2 sentences of this, that would answer that question, and nobody could refute it. So just to let you know, we've nailed it beyond, but I'm not allowed to say how or why yet.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
It will remain a little bit longer.
Have you still got the shawl? Is the shawl in your possession?
It is, yeah. Of course it is. It was in the Sun newspaper a couple of years ago. It was like a Jackpot the Ripper or something, about Jack the Ripper off of all this. I've still got the shawl. It's going to my children. Yeah. I've got a great idea for it. I do. You see, the other thing is we were missing a big point of this. This is about 5 women that were butchered by a madman. You know, the legend of Jack the Ripper. That's what lives. Not so much the story anymore. It's the Jack the Ripper name. Yeah. I want to do something with the shawl as a testament to those 5 victims, and not glorify the serial killer whatsoever. This isn't about him. This is about the victims. You know, the Yorkshire Ripper, you know, what's happened to him recently. And there's a Netflix one called Ripper. Well, actually, why not just put the 13 names of the victims that died at his hands and the 7 people that survived him? Why not say, this is a story about Polly Nichols, this is a story about Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine, Rosemary Kelly, Martha Tabram, Emma Smith, you know, the Pinch Street Torso, Francis Coles, Alice Mackenzie. These are all Whitechapel victims. Why do that story? That's the story. Not the fact that this top hat and tails man walked around mysteriously murdered. That's not the story. And I think there's a crossover between fact and fiction. The fiction of Dracula, you know, or Frankenstein or the Wolfman. This is where that legend belongs. But the thing is, they were made up. This wasn't. So that's the story. It's not Jack the Ripper, sadly. But as you know, in the world we live, that's the name that's carried.
Yes.
Yeah.
Richard's asking, why choose the Whitechapel area? Because he could have gone anywhere to kill prostitutes.
Well, he lived there.
Yeah, exactly.
There's like 1,600 of them right on his doorstep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did Cliff's asking, do you think he ever used surgical knives? And if so, were they ever found?
Oh, do you know what? That's such an interesting question. Just, you know why? Because I think it was the 2nd of October, so just after the murders. I think it's even just after the double event. There was a knife found, a bloodied knife in a doorway up the Whitechapel Road.
Oh.
And they thought that was the murder knife. Now, I can't mention the man's name, but we were approached by the man that said he owned that knife.
Yeah.
Yari and me. And we did the DNA work. Well, I didn't. Yari did. Where they found the blood cells, you'd be surprised, because obviously that knife had been around for over 100 years. And the blood on the DNA didn't match Kosminski or any of the, or the blood of Catherine Eddowes, which would have been on that knife.
Yeah.
So no, there is another one, another name in the ripperology world. He said he was given the knife by the family, but interestingly enough, he didn't do anything with it.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Cool.
It's strange. I don't know if you kind of, some people are going to don't want to put it out there, maybe because they just don't want that attention, they just don't want, or they don't want to be swarmed with people coming from all angles at them, I don't know. I find it strange that somebody won't put something forward that's,
well,
can I ask
that would be classed as genuine, or could probably help develop case further.
Can I ask, Russell? I mean, everybody's talking about a surgical knife and things. When you look at the cuts that were they made with a very sharp knife, or was it just a normal knife? It's.
Well, of course, I wasn't there, and I'm not a surgeon or a scientist.
Right.
But from the pathology reports and the coroner's report, said it was a sharp knife.
Right.
About 6 inches in length, and of course they put that down to the Lister knife.
Yeah.
So so the kidney. So for those of you that don't know, after the double event, a kidney was sent to a guy called George Lusk, who was the head of the Vigilance Committee. I think it was the 16th of October. That was the From Hell letter, which is the only one I believe that could be him. And in the box was half a piece of kidney. That was sent to a Dr. Openshaw at the London hospital, and that's the knife that they thought it was. They've got that with Openshaw's ephemera, his belongings in that museum, and it's about, it's about that knife. It's a thin, long bladed knife.
Yeah,
and that's what they thought it was because of the way of the infliction.
Right.
You know what that's all I can say. It was the report, because we weren't there at the time, and the knife was clean.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Some of the victims look as though they've kind of been ripped, don't they? Just, I know we rip thing, but it just looks a frenzied attack, doesn't it? So concentrated in so short, obviously in shorter time. It couldn't have been more than minutes, could it? Before they got to be off and away, before somebody come.
Yeah.
Sometimes it makes you cry that these women had to go through that.
Yeah.
Terrible.
Yeah.
And
again, it brings it back to that point, doesn't it? That it's not about this top-hatted, gentleman killer.
It's about Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Kelly. This story's about them women. No justice has ever been brought. And that's my ambition now. I've named Jack the Ripper. I'd like to bring justice for these victims.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Fantastic. What an excellent show. Have you got any more questions, guys?
I'm just I just find it fascinating. The whole journey itself, I find it all fascinating.
Let me give you just one little thing. Why was the Shaw left at the murder scene? The Shaw was left at the murder scene because the pattern of Michaelmas names those 2 dates, the 29th of September, 8th of November. He left the Shaw there, letting people know in his cryptic mental state the date of his next murder.
Yeah.
I'm very proud to piece that together.
Wow.
He left it there, yeah.
We've got another one. Sorry, Steve.
I'm just saying, going back to that idea that with rituals and things like that, Michaelmas, all them kind of stuff would have been very specific dates.
Exactly that. Exactly like
of good festivals, the absolute opposite of it. So it's a strange one, isn't it? It's bizarre. It's bizarre. What a journey.
Hannah Birchall is asking, is your journey with Aaron Kuzminski research nearly at an end now?
Listen, I know Hannah, and I want to let you know this is one of those exceptionally talented, and I do mean talented, psychic ladies that I've ever come across. And Hannah was one of those ladies that came on that night with me. I can tell you, Hannah was telling me things that only I knew. So there's, like, I give you this story but there's only things that I know.
Yes.
And Hannah was asking me those questions that I only know. So she's exceptionally talented, Hannah.
Brilliant.
I definitely recommend the contact.
Brilliant.
Is it nearly over? Well, the search into who he was, what happened to him, his origins, what happened to him after the murders, during the murders, I've done all of that. There's another big journey that I'm just about to embark on. Obviously, COVID's delayed that by 12 months, hopefully not much longer, that I'll be embarking on shortly. But really, the discovery of who it was is very much over now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's about bringing justice for these ladies now, isn't it? That's the thing.
I'd like to publicise that more than anything else.
Yeah, I think that's where to go as well. We live in a world where gore and, pain, all these things are kind of turn-ons for people. That's how it seems to be. That they either want that drama, they want blood, they want God in bit with, they want everything, don't they? But they don't want to actually process that true story behind it. They're just more interested in horrific.
Well, I know descendants of these victims, and they're lovely ladies and they're lovely people, Yeah. And surely, again, if it was your great-great-great-grandmother, it's so far away distance-wise. But again, that was your ancestor. And
it's not who you are, and it still changes that family's history, doesn't it? That family path changes at that point. It's ended. There's no kids coming from any of these ladies. There's no... there's no follow-on.
Well, they did have children. Holly had 5 kids. Catherine had 2. Otherwise we wouldn't have got the DNA.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Mary Kelly didn't. Mary Kelly, they thought that she was pregnant, but obviously we couldn't prove that because she was butchered. Elizabeth Stride, they all had kids.
Yeah.
That's sad.
Sad that these women had to go out for 4pence just to make some money because they couldn't stay. That's what I think is so sad. That
I agree.
It's horrible.
There was something I have been asked before, but only once. How do I identify with these victims? And many, many years ago, something very bad happened to me in my life, and I was homeless for about 6 weeks, thankfully in Cambridge, it's a beautiful city, so it wasn't that bad. Well, it was, but it could have been worse. And it's sort of that destitution. I know what that feels like. I know it's like to literally,
living
have not
minute to minute.
Yeah, I know what that feels like.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Hannah's saying, thank you, Russell. We have met Ralph at Hugh Battery before. I'm the one that chased the spirit cat, lol.
Yeah, I actually remember that. I know, Russell, you don't know this, but I own well, I don't own it. It belongs to the UK, but I run a big gun battery. It's the only World War I battlefield that exists on the UK, and I came across it by accident. I've now turned it into a monument that's never going to disappear. But what's interesting is I'm actually putting we're just looking at a £2.5 million revamp of the site to get the stories of the people, not the battle between us and the Germans. It's about the soldiers that died and the families that died, and there's 122 children that died. And so I can relate to what you're saying. When you talk about the Ripper, everybody gets the Ripper, and they all talk about the Ripper and things. And then I start to look at it and think, yes, that's only one man who's done something. Look at the fallout of that, which is those women that have, and I believe in their stories. And I, like you, I'm a great believer in we should put it right. If you've now found the Ripper, then it needs finishing off. So I applaud you for that. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah,
very much so.
Excellent. And thank you very much for joining us, Russell. It's been a very interesting chat with you tonight. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for everybody that's tuned in and watched this evening. Thanks to Ralph and Holly, Steve, and the poor old guy in the background, Phil. Thank you very much. We hope to speak to you again soon then, Russell.
Yeah, we'd love you to come back on again.
That'd be lovely.
Yeah,
definitely.
Thank you.
And I'll
Good night.
I'll send you a message so you've got me number. I want to keep in touch with you. I want to follow this. I think it's fantastic.
So do I, because I think at the museum I've got, Russell, we're doing this thing about murderers and of course the Ripper's one of the big things that the UK talks about. So I would like to get more information so that we can put something in the museum to recognise what you've done as well. Definitely.
That'll be amazing.
Cool.
Yeah, definitely.
Brilliant.
Right, so we'll say good night to you chaps. See you tomorrow night.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.